Captain Jake Morrison sat in his pilot chair and watched the stars move past his ship's windows. His cargo freighter, called the Terra's Hope, was not fancy or new, but it got the job done. The ship carried mining tools and equipment to the far colonies where people worked hard to find precious metals and rare earth materials. Jake had been flying this route for 12 years, and he knew every asteroid and space station between here and the Outer Rim. Lisa Carter worked at the engineer station behind him. She was a smart woman who could fix anything that broke on their old ship. Her hands were always dirty with grease and oil, but she never complained about the hard work. Next to her sat Ben Hughes, who handled all the navigation and communication systems. Ben was quiet most of the time, but he knew the space lanes better than anyone Jake had ever met. The three of them had been working together for 5 years now. They were not rich, but they made enough money to keep flying, and that was all Jake wanted. He liked the peace and quiet of deep space. He liked being far away from the crowded cities and busy trade routes where big corporate ships pushed everyone else around. That morning started like any other. Jake was drinking his coffee and checking the cargo manifest when Ben's communication board started beeping. The sound was urgent and repetitive, like an alarm clock that would not stop. Ben put on his headset and listened to the signal. "Captain, we have a distress beacon," Ben said without looking up from his controls. "It's coming from Sector 7 near the big asteroid cluster." Jake set down his coffee cup and frowned. Distress calls in the Outer Rim were usually bad news. Pirates liked to use fake emergency signals to trick honest cargo ships into stopping. Then they would steal everything valuable and sometimes kill the crew. Other times the distress calls were real, but helping meant losing time and money. "What kind of ship is it?" Jake asked. Ben worked his controls and tried to get more information from the weak signal. "It's a small vessel, Captain. The beacon says life support is failing and they have maybe 6 hours of air left." Lisa looked up from her engineering station. "Captain, most ships out here carry enough air for at least 2 days. If they only have 6 hours left, then something really bad happened to them." Jake stared out at the stars and thought about what to do. The smart thing would be to report the distress call to the nearest space station and keep flying. That way, someone else could handle the rescue and Jake would not lose his delivery bonus. But Jake had never been able to ignore people who needed help. "Change course, Ben," Jake said. "Take us to that beacon." Ben nodded and started working his navigation controls. "Course plotted, Captain. We should reach them in about 2 hours. Lisa shook her head, but she was smiling. "You never learn, do you, Captain? This is going to cost us time and fuel." "Maybe," Jake said. "But I would want someone to help us if we were stuck out here." The Terra's Hope turned away from its planned route and headed toward the asteroid field. Jake watched the big rocks floating in space as they got closer to the distress signal. Some of the asteroids were as big as small moons, and they cast long shadows in the light from distant stars. "I'm getting a visual on the ship," Ben said. "It's definitely not human design. Looks like it might be Zalari." Jake had heard of the Zalari, but he had never met one. They were a peaceful alien race that mostly kept to themselves. Their home planet was poor, and they did not have much technology compared to humans or other spacefaring species. Most people barely knew they existed. "There it is," Lisa said, pointing at the main screen. The alien ship was small and damaged. Jake could see holes in its hull where tiny meteorites had punched through the metal. The ship was drifting without power, and parts of it were venting atmosphere into space. It would not last much longer. "Life signs?" Ben asked. 3 heat signatures," Lisa reported. "They're all clustered in what looks like the rear section. That must be the only part that still has air." Jake studied the damaged vessel and tried to figure out how to help. His ship was not designed for rescue operations. The Terra's Hope was just a cargo hauler with basic equipment. But Jake had docked with damaged ships before when he worked for the emergency rescue service 10 years ago. "We'll have to dock manually," Jake said. "Ben, you handle communications. Try to reach the survivors and let them know we're here to help. Lisa, you need to get the emergency patches ready. We might have to seal some of those holes before we can safely bring them aboard." "Captain?" Lisa said, looking worried. Our ship isn't built for extra passengers. We don't have enough life support for 3 more people. We'll make it work, Jake said. It's only a few days to the next station. Jake took control of the ship and carefully moved closer to the damaged alien vessel. Flying near asteroids was always dangerous because the big rocks created gravity fields that could pull ships off course. He had to be very careful not to hit anything while he positioned the Terra's Hope next to the Zalari ship. The alien vessel was even smaller up close. It looked like it was built for maybe 4 or 5 crew members at most. Jake could see through. Some of the holes in the hull and the inside looked dark and cold. He wondered how the survivors were still alive in there. I have contact, Ben said. They speak standard language, but it's hard to understand them. They sound scared. Tell them we're going to dock and bring them aboard, Jake said. Tell them to move away from the docking port. Jake lined up his ship with the alien vessel's docking ring. This was the hardest part because both ships were drifting and spinning slowly. He had to match their movement perfectly or the docking clamps would not seal properly. If he made a mistake, both ships could be damaged. The docking clamps engaged with a loud clang that echoed through the Terra's Hope. Jake checked all his instruments to make sure the seal was good. Green lights showed that the airlock was secure, and they had a safe connection between the 2 ships. Lisa, you're with me, Jake said. Ben, stay here and monitor both ships. If anything goes wrong, undock immediately. Jake and Lisa put on emergency suits and went to the airlock. When they opened the door, they could smell the fear and desperation from the alien ship. The air was thin and cold. Jake turned on his flashlight and stepped through the connecting tunnel. Inside the Zalari ship, he found 3 aliens huddled together in the rear compartment. They had blue-scaled skin and large dark eyes that reflected his flashlight beam. One was older with gray scales around his face. The other 2 looked younger, and one appeared to be female based on her smaller size. We help you, Jake said slowly in standard language. Come with us safe? The older alien stood up shakily and spoke in heavily accented standard. I am Kethvar. This is my daughter Myra Keth and our engineer Zephnow. We thought we would die here. Not today, Jake said. Can you walk? The 3 Solari gathered a few small belongings and followed Jake and Lisa back to the Terra's Hope. Jake sealed the airlock behind them and helped the aliens to the small passenger area near the galley. They looked exhausted and frightened, but alive. We have no money to pay you, Kethvar said sadly. Our ship carried everything we owned, and now it is destroyed. Don't worry about payment, Jake said. We'll take you to the next station, and you can find passage home from there. Kethvar reached into a small bag and pulled out something that looked like a crystal. It was about the size of Jake's thumb, and it glowed with a soft blue light. This is all I can give you, the old alien said. It is a memory crystal from our homeworld. It contains old stories and history. Perhaps someday it will have meaning for you. Jake took the crystal and felt its smooth surface. It was warm to the touch, and the light inside seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Thank you, he said, but you didn't need to give us anything. Kethvar smiled, and his large eyes glistened with tears. You saved our lives when you had no reason to help us. Among my people, we never forget such kindness. Jake put the crystal in his pocket and went back to the bridge. Ben had already plotted a course to the nearest space station where the Zalari could find transportation home. As the Terra's Hope pulled away from the drifting alien ship, Jake watched it disappear into the asteroid field. He had no idea that the small crystal in his pocket would someday save all of humanity. He just knew that he had done the right thing, and 3 beings were alive because of it. That was enough for Jake Morrison. 3 months passed after Jake Morrison rescued the 3 Zalari from their broken ship. Life returned to normal aboard the Terra's Hope as they continued their cargo runs between the mining colonies and supply stations. The memory crystal that Kethvar had given him sat on Jake's desk, where it caught the light from the ship's windows. Sometimes Jake would pick it up and wonder about the stories it contained, but he never tried to activate it. Lisa Carter had cleaned and repaired all the damage from their rescue mission. The extra strain on their life support systems during the 3 days it took to reach the nearest station had worn down some components, but everything was working fine now. Ben Hughes had filed all the proper reports about finding the distressed alien vessel, and the authorities had thanked them for their humanitarian efforts. The Terra's Hope was hauling a load of industrial fabricators to a new mining operation on the edge of known space when Ben's communication system picked up an urgent message. The signal was weak and had been routed through dozens of relay stations across the galaxy. Most of the transmission was corrupted by static and interference, but Ben worked for an hour to clean up the audio. "Captain, you need to hear this," Ben said, with concern in his voice. Jake came over to the communication station and put on the headset. Through the crackling static, he could hear a familiar voice speaking in heavily accented standard language. It was Kethvar, the old Zalari scholar they had rescued months ago. "Captain Morrison, if you receive this message, please listen carefully," the alien's voice said with obvious urgency. "I have learned something terrible that threatens your people. The hegemony is not gone as your species believes. They have been building their strength in the dark regions beyond the galactic rim. They plan to return and finish their conquest. Humanity is next on their list." Jake felt his blood turn cold. The hegemony was a name from history books and old war stories. Centuries ago, they had been a coalition of aggressive alien species that conquered most of the known galaxy. They destroyed entire civilizations and enslaved the survivors. But they had disappeared 300 years ago, and most people assumed they were extinct. "How can he know this?" Lisa asked when Jake played the message for her. "I don't know," Jake said. But Kethvar didn't seem like the type to make things up. The message continued with more details about hegemony fleet movements in deep space and projected timelines for their return. Kethvar urged Jake to warn the human authorities immediately. The transmission ended with coordinates for a dead drop location where more information could be found. Jake looked at the memory crystal on his desk. It had been pulsing more frequently over the past few weeks with soft blue light. He had assumed it was just reacting to their ship's electrical systems, but now he wondered if there was more to it. "Ben, plot a course for those coordinates," Jake said. "We need to see what else Kethvar left for us." "Captain, that will take us 3 days out of our way," Ben replied. "We'll lose our delivery bonus if we're late. Some things are more important than money," Jake said. The coordinates led them to an abandoned research station in a remote star system. The facility had been empty for decades and was slowly falling apart from neglect. Jake and Lisa took a shuttle over to investigate while Ben monitored from the Terra's Hope. Inside the old station, they found a data cache hidden in the computer core. The information it contained was staggering. Detailed star charts showed hegemony fleet positions throughout the galaxy's outer regions. Battle reports described new weapons and ship designs. Intelligence summaries outlined their plans for conquering the remaining free systems, including all human colonies. "This is real," Lisa said as she studied the tactical data. "Someone has been watching the hegemony very carefully for a long time." Jake activated the memory crystal and connected it to the station's computer systems. The crystal interfaced with the alien technology, and suddenly the research station's main display filled with holographic star maps and historical records. The amount of information was overwhelming. The crystal contained the collective memories of the Zalari people going back thousands of years. They had witnessed the rise of the hegemony and survived their first wave of conquests. The Zalari had been scholars and record keepers, even then documenting everything they observed about the enemy's tactics and weaknesses. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to a section of data about hegemony command structures. "They always follow the same pattern when they invade a new system. First they eliminate the military forces, then they target civilian population centers to break morale." Jake studied the invasion timelines and felt sick to his stomach. According to the projections, humanity had maybe 6 months before the hegemony reached the outer colonies. Earth itself would be attacked within a year. The human military had no idea what was coming, and they were completely unprepared. "We have to warn Earth Command," Jake said. "They need to see this information." But as Jake copied the data from the crystal, he realized how difficult that would be. He was just a cargo ship captain with no military rank or political connections. Who would believe such an incredible story, especially when it came from alien sources that most humans had never heard of? The trip back to civilized space took 2 weeks. Jake spent most of that time studying the Zalari records and trying to understand the scope of the threat. The hegemony was not just a military force, but an entire philosophy of conquest and domination. They viewed other species as resources to be harvested or obstacles to be eliminated. The crystal revealed that the Zalari were not just simple traders and scholars as most people believed. They were survivors who had spent centuries gathering intelligence about their enemies. Every Zalari ship that traveled the galaxy was actually a spy vessel collecting information about other species and their military capabilities. Kethvar had recognized something in Jake's character during their brief encounter. The old alien had decided that humans might be different from other species the hegemony had conquered. He had given Jake the crystal as both a gift and a test to see what humanity would do with the knowledge it contained. When the Terra's Hope reached the nearest major space station, Jake sent urgent messages to Earth Command and the Colonial Defense Force. He explained about the rescue of the Zalari ship and the intelligence they had provided about the hegemony threat. He included sample data from the crystal to prove his claims were genuine. The response was not what Jake had hoped for. A junior communications officer acknowledged receipt of his message and promised to forward it to the appropriate departments. Jake never heard back from anyone in authority. His warnings disappeared into the vast bureaucracy of human space defense. "They're not taking this seriously," Ben said after they received a form letter thanking Jake for his civic concern. "They think we're just paranoid cargo haulers," Lisa added with frustration. Jake realized that official channels were not going to work. The human military was too confident in their own abilities to listen to warnings from outsiders. They had never faced a threat like the hegemony, and they could not imagine being outmatched by any alien force. But Jake remembered the lessons from the crystal about hegemony tactics. They always struck first at the outer colonies where defenses were weakest. The civilian populations on the frontier would be the first to die, and they deserved a chance to prepare. Jake started sending copies of the intelligence data to every colony administrator and mining boss he knew. Most of them ignored his messages or dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes. But a few took him seriously because they knew Jake Morrison was not the type of man to spread false rumors. Helen Price, who ran operations at Kepler Station, was the first to respond positively. "Jake, you saved my nephew's mining crew during that solar flare emergency last year," she said during their video conference. "If you tell me the hegemony is coming back, I believe you." Word began to spread through the informal networks that connected humanity's frontier settlements. Ship captains talked to other ship captains. Mining supervisors shared information with their counterparts on other worlds. Colony administrators quietly began reviewing their emergency plans and checking their defensive capabilities. The crystal had shown Jake something important about human nature. Unlike other species, the hegemony had conquered humans did not rely solely on their government and military for protection. The people on the frontier were used to taking care of themselves and helping their neighbors survive. Jake continued his regular cargo runs, but now he carried something more valuable than mining equipment and supplies. He carried hope and information. That might give humanity a fighting chance against an enemy that had destroyed civilizations across the galaxy. The memory crystal pulsed with blue light on his desk as if approving of his efforts. Kethvar had chosen well when he decided to trust a human cargo captain with the most important intelligence in Zalari history. Jake Morrison would not let that trust be wasted. 3 months later, when long-range sensors detected the first hegemony scout ships entering human space, the colonial defense networks were already forming. Small groups of armed freighters and converted mining vessels began gathering at strategic points throughout the outer systems. The human military still did not believe the threat was real, but the people who lived and worked on the frontier. The journey to Earth took Jake Morrison and his crew 2 weeks through the busiest shipping lanes in human space. The Terra's hope had never traveled so close to the core worlds where massive corporate fleets dominated the space lanes and military patrols checked every cargo manifest. Jake felt out of place among the sleek passenger liners and heavy battle cruisers that crowded the orbital traffic patterns around humanity's homeworld. Earth's Orbital Defense Command was the most impressive structure Jake had ever seen. The massive space station hung in high orbit above the blue and white planet like a gleaming metal moon. Thousands of ships docked there every day, bringing goods and people from across human space. The station's defensive weapons could destroy entire fleets, and its sensors could detect threats from dozens of light years away. Admiral Patricia Kane commanded the orbital defenses from her office in the station's central tower. She was a career military officer who had served for 30 years and earned her position through political skill as much as tactical ability. Her record showed victories against pirate fleets and successful peacekeeping operations in disputed systems, but she had never faced a threat like the hegemony. Jake had requested a meeting through official channels and waited 3 days for an appointment. He brought copies of all the intelligence data from Kethvar's memory crystal along with his own analysis of the hegemony's strategic capabilities. Lisa and Ben accompanied him to provide technical support and witness testimony about their encounter. With the Zalari refugees, Admiral Kane's office was decorated with battle flags and commendation plaques from her long career. Large windows looked out at Earth's surface where billions of humans lived and worked in safety, protected by the orbital defense network. Kane sat behind a polished metal desk that reflected the lights from the command displays around the room. "Captain Morrison," Kane said without looking up from her paperwork, "I understand you have some concerns about an alleged alien threat." Jake activated a portable holographic projector and displayed the star charts from the crystal. "Admiral, the hegemony has been building a massive fleet in the dark regions beyond our sensor range. According to this intelligence, they plan to attack human space within the next 6 months. Kane glanced at the holographic displays with obvious skepticism. "And where exactly did you obtain this intelligence, Captain?" "From Zalari refugees that my crew rescued 3 months ago," Jake replied. "Their people have been monitoring hegemony activities for centuries. This crystal contains detailed records of their military capabilities and invasion strategies." The Admiral leaned back in her chair and studied Jake with cold eyes. "Let me understand this correctly, Captain. You want me to mobilize the entire human fleet based on stories from a primitive alien species? Stories contained in some sort of magical crystal that glows blue?" Lisa spoke up from her chair beside Jake. "Admiral, we've had the data verified by 3 independent analysis firms. The tactical information is consistent with historical records of hegemony operations. This isn't some elaborate hoax." "Even if I believe this nonsense," Kane said dismissively, "the hegemony disappeared 300 years ago. They're probably extinct like most of the other ancient threats that used to terrorize the galaxy." Jake activated another section of the crystal's data showing recent surveillance reports. "The intelligence indicates they've been rebuilding their forces in secret. They never went extinct, they just retreated to prepare for a final campaign to conquer the remaining free systems." Kane stood up and walked to the large windows overlooking Earth. "Captain Morrison, I appreciate your civic concern, but I have real threats to worry about. Pirate raids on shipping lanes, colony disputes over mining rights, trade route security issues. I don't have time or resources to waste on fairy tales about ancient enemies." "What if you're wrong?" Ben asked quietly. "What if they do attack and we're not ready?" The Admiral turned back toward them with an expression of cold certainty. "Then we'll handle them the same way humanity has handled every threat throughout our history. With superior technology, better tactics, and the fighting spirit that made us the dominant species in this sector of the galaxy." Jake felt his frustration growing as he realized the Admiral was not going to listen to reason. "Admiral, the crystal contains detailed analysis of human military capabilities. The hegemony knows exactly how strong our defenses are, and they wouldn't attack unless they were confident of victory. Your alien friends are probably just trying to manipulate us into some kind of costly military buildup," Kane replied. "It's an old trick, Captain. Create a fake threat, then offer to sell us the solution. The Zalari aren't selling anything, Jake said angrily. They're trying to warn us because they remember what happened to their own civilization when the hegemony attacked. Kane pressed a button on her desk and 2 security guards entered the office. Gentlemen, I think this meeting is over. Captain Morrison, thank you for bringing your concerns to my attention. I'll make sure they receive proper consideration through appropriate channels. The security escorts were polite but firm as they guided Jake and his crew out of the Admiral's office. They walked through the corridors of the command station past displays showing the positions of human fleets throughout the galaxy. Jake counted hundreds of ships, but he knew from the crystal's data that the hegemony had thousands. She's not going to do anything, Lisa said once they were back aboard the Terra's Hope. She thinks we're just paranoid freight haulers who don't understand military strategy, Ben added with disgust. Jake sat in his pilot chair and stared out at the orbital defense platforms surrounding Earth. Each platform mounted enough firepower to destroy a city, but they were designed to fight human enemies using human tactics. The hegemony would approach the battle completely differently, and the static defenses would be overwhelmed quickly. So what do we do now? Lisa asked. Jake was quiet for several minutes, thinking about Admiral Kane's arrogance and the dismissive way she had treated their warning. The human military establishment was too confident in its own abilities to recognize a superior threat. They had never been truly tested by an enemy that outmatched them in every category, but Jake remembered something from the crystal's historical records. When the hegemony attacked other civilizations, they always struck first at the frontier settlements where defenses were weakest. The core worlds like Earth would be saved for last after the outer colonies had been conquered and their resources absorbed into the hegemony war machine. We warn the colonies, Jake said finally. The frontier settlements don't have the luxury of ignoring threats. They know that survival depends on helping each other and being prepared for the worst. Over the following weeks, Jake used every contact he had developed during 12 years of cargo runs through the outer systems. He sent copies of the intelligence data to mining supervisors, colonial administrators, freight captains, and anyone else who might listen. Most of them dismissed his warnings as easily as Admiral Kane had done, but some people remembered that Jake Morrison was the kind of man who risked his ship and crew to save strangers. Colony Administrator Helen Price at Kepler Station was the first to take him seriously. You saved my nephew's mining crew from that solar flare last year, she said during their video conference. If you say the hegemony is coming, I believe you. Mining boss Carl Weber at the Titan extraction facility had worked with Jake for 5 years. Morrison's never lied to me about anything, Weber told his security chief. If he says we need to prepare for war, then we better start getting ready. Freight Captain Nancy Lopez, who ran supplies to the agricultural colonies, had seen Jake help dozens of ships with mechanical problems over the years. Jake Morrison doesn't spread rumors, she told her crew. If he's warning us about the hegemony, then we need to listen. Word spread slowly through the networks that connected humanity's frontier communities. Ship captains talked to other ship captains during loading operations at remote stations. Mining supervisors shared information when they met at quarterly safety conferences. Colony administrators discussed defensive preparations during routine administrative calls. The warnings moved through informal channels, based on personal relationships and mutual trust rather than official government communications. People who had never heard of the Zalari or seen the memory crystal's data began preparing for an enemy they hoped would never come. Small groups of armed freighters started gathering at strategic locations throughout the outer systems, mining. Colonies began stockpiling weapons and supplies. Agricultural settlements organized civilian defense forces and practiced evacuation procedures. The frontier was getting ready for war while the core worlds prepared for business as usual. Jake continued making his regular cargo runs, but now he carried something more valuable than mining equipment and industrial supplies. He carried copies of the crystal's tactical data to anyone willing to study hegemony battle strategies and weapon capabilities. Each person who received the information shared it with others they trusted. 3 months after his meeting with Admiral Kane, the first reports began coming in from long-range sensor stations. Unidentified ships had been detected at the very edge of human space, moving in coordinated formations toward the outer colonies. The first signs appeared on the deep space monitoring stations at the very edge of human territory. Sensor technician Gary Miller was working the night shift at Outpost 7 when his equipment detected something that should not have been there. Massive energy signatures were moving through hyperspace toward the inner systems, but they were still too far away for detailed identification. Gary had been monitoring space traffic for 8 years, and he knew the normal patterns of civilian and military vessels. These contacts were different. They moved in perfect formation like a military fleet, but they were much larger than any human task force. The energy readings suggested thousands of ships traveling together in a coordinated advance. "Base, this is Outpost 7, Gary transmitted to the regional command center. "I'm detecting a large fleet of unknown vessels approaching from Galactic North. Estimated arrival in the outer systems within 72 hours. The response from command was dismissive. Outpost 7, this is probably a sensor malfunction or civilian convoy following an unusual route. Continue monitoring and report any definite hostile contacts." But Gary remembered the warnings that had been circulating through unofficial channels for months. A cargo captain named Jake Morrison had been telling anyone who would listen that an ancient enemy called the Hegemony was planning to attack human space. Most people dismissed it as paranoid speculation, but some of the frontier communities had been quietly preparing for war. Gary activated the emergency communication system that connected all the outer monitoring posts. Within minutes he was talking to sensor operators at a dozen other stations throughout the border regions. They had all detected the same massive fleet approaching from deep space. "This is it," said Martha Chun from Outpost 12. "This is what Morrison warned us about. The Hegemony is coming." 3 days later, the enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a dark wave of destruction. Admiral Patricia Kane stood in the command center of Earth's orbital defense station and watched her tactical displays fill with hostile contacts. Thousands of ships appeared on the sensors, ranging from massive dreadnoughts the size of small moons to swift destroyers that moved like angry wasps. "How many ships?" Kane asked her tactical officer with a voice that tried to hide her shock. "Preliminary count shows over 3,000 vessels," Admiral Lieutenant Commander Steve Walsh reported. "All contacts are showing hostile configurations, and they're not responding to any communication attempts." Kane felt her confidence crumble as she realized the scope of the threat facing humanity. Her entire fleet consisted of maybe 200 ships scattered across dozens of systems. The enemy had brought a force that outnumbered them 15 to 1, and these were not the primitive vessels she had expected from an ancient civilization. "Admiral, they're advancing toward the inner system," Walsh continued. "Estimated time to Earth orbit is 6 hours at current speed." But Kane did not know about the preparations that had been taking place in the asteroid belt for the past 6 months. She did not know that Jake Morrison had been organizing a civilian defense network using intelligence from the Zalari memory crystal. Hundreds of converted cargo ships and mining vessels had been gathering at hidden bases throughout the outer system. Jake stood on the bridge of the Terra's Hope and watched the Hegemony fleet advance toward humanity's homeworld. His ship had been extensively modified with military-grade shields and weapons purchased with donations from grateful colonists who believed his warnings. Around him, dozens of other converted freighters maintained formation as they prepared for the most important battle in human history. Lisa Carter worked at the communication station coordinating with the civilian fleet. She had spent months studying hegemony tactical data and developing counter-strategies based on the historical records in the crystal. Ben Hughes plotted attack vectors through the asteroid field using his detailed knowledge of every rock and debris cluster in the system. "All ships, this is Morrison," Jake broadcast on the fleet frequency. "The Hegemony thinks they're facing a disorganized and unprepared enemy. They've studied our official military tactics and they expect us to fight like a conventional navy. Let's show them what humans do when someone threatens our home." The civilian fleet was unlike anything the hegemony had encountered in their previous conquests. Instead of large capital ships fighting in organized battle lines, they faced swarms of smaller vessels that attacked in coordinated groups, then scattered before return fire could be targeted. The converted freighters used hit-and-run tactics that took advantage of their superior knowledge of local space. Mining ship Captain Roy Davis led a squadron of ore haulers that had been equipped with military-grade railguns. They emerged from hiding places in the asteroid belt and fired concentrated volleys at hegemony destroyers before disappearing back into the maze of floating rocks. The enemy ships tried to pursue, but their larger vessels were too clumsy to navigate the crowded asteroid field. Agricultural transport captain Susan Park commanded a group of cargo ships that had been converted into missile platforms. They launched coordinated attacks on hegemony supply vessels, then used the complex gravity fields around Jupiter's moons to escape retaliation. The enemy fleet found itself constantly harassed by opponents who refused to engage in conventional battles. The first major engagement took place near the orbit of Mars. Admiral Kane's official fleet consisted of heavy cruisers and battleships, designed to fight other human vessels using traditional tactics. They formed orderly battle lines and advanced toward the enemy according to standard military doctrine. The hegemony responded exactly as the Zalari records had predicted. Their ships moved in perfect coordination using advanced weapons that cut through human shields like they were made of paper. Kane's fleet was overwhelmed within the first hour of fighting and forced to retreat toward Earth's orbital defenses, but as the hegemony pressed inward toward the core system, they encountered Jake Morrison's civilian network. Converted mining vessels emerged from hiding places throughout the asteroid belt, using tactics that had never been recorded in their historical databases. The small human ships attacked in groups, then scattered when the enemy tried to concentrate fire. Colony Administrator Helen Price commanded the defense of Kepler, station using modified cargo haulers and emergency response vessels. Her ships used the complex gravitational fields around the gas giant to perform impossible maneuvers that confused hegemony targeting systems. They fought like space pirates rather than organized military units. Mining boss Carl Weber led a squadron of heavy industrial ships that had been converted into assault rams. They used their massive cargo holds to carry conventional explosives and their reinforced hulls to penetrate enemy formations. The hegemony had never faced opponents who were willing to use their own ships as weapons. The battle raged for 3 days across the entire solar system. The hegemony's superior technology and numbers should have guaranteed quick victory, but they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to follow conventional rules of warfare. Every asteroid could hide a human ship, and every civilian station had been converted into a fortress. Jake Morrison coordinated the defense from his position in the asteroid belt, using communication networks that the enemy could not intercept. The civilian fleet used mining radio frequencies and commercial shipping channels to maintain contact while avoiding hegemony electronic warfare systems. "They're adapting to our tactics," Lisa reported from her station. "The enemy commanders are starting to spread their formations and use smaller units to hunt our ships." "Then we adapt too," Jake replied. "Signal all units to implement Plan 7. We're going to show them what desperate humans can accomplish." Plan 7 was based on historical records from the Crystal showing how previous civilizations had failed against hegemony invasion tactics. Instead of trying to defend fixed positions, the human fleet would abandon the outer system and concentrate all available forces for a final battle near Earth itself, but this apparent retreat was actually a trap. The civilian ships had spent months preparing hidden supply caches and weapon stockpiles throughout the inner system. As the hegemony advanced toward Earth, they found themselves entering a maze of defensive positions that had been carefully planned. Using intelligence from the Zellari memory crystal, Admiral Kane watched from her command station as the civilian fleet implemented strategies that her military academy training had never covered. Cargo ships used industrial equipment as weapons, and mining vessels fought with the desperate courage of people defending their homes and families. Admiral Lieutenant Commander Walsh said with amazement in his voice, The civilian fleet is actually holding them back. The hegemony advance has been stopped at the orbit of Mars. Kane realized that Jake Morrison had been right about everything. The enemy was exactly as dangerous as the cargo captain had warned, and only his preparation had given humanity any chance of survival. The memory crystal from a grateful alien had become the foundation of Earth's defense, but the battle was far from over. The hegemony had been surprised by human tactics, but they were rapidly adapting their own strategies. More enemy ships continued to arrive from deep space, and humanity's resources were being stretched to the breaking point. The fourth day of battle brought a moment that changed everything. Jake Morrison was coordinating attacks from his position in the asteroid belt when Ben Hughes detected something unexpected on the long-range sensors. A new fleet was approaching the solar system, but these ships were not using hegemony energy signatures. "Captain, I'm reading multiple contacts coming in from Galactic South," Ben reported with confusion in his voice. "The ships are small, but they're moving in perfect formation. Energy readings don't match anything in our databases." Jake studied the sensor data and felt a spark of hope in his chest. The approaching vessels were elegant and streamlined, unlike the brutal efficiency of hegemony warships. Their energy patterns pulsed in regular rhythms that reminded him of something familiar. "Lisa, activate the memory crystal," Jake ordered. "Run a comparison analysis on those energy signatures." The crystal interfaced with the Terra's Hope's computer systems and immediately began flashing with bright blue light. The approaching ships were broadcasting identification codes that matched records in the Zelari historical database. But these were not the simple trader vessels that most humans associated with the peaceful alien species. Admiral Patricia Kane watched from Earth's orbital command station as her tactical displays updated with the new fleet positions. She had spent 3 days watching human civilization fight for its survival against impossible odds. Her military training told her that any new arrivals would probably side with the hegemony since they represented the winning side. "Admiral, the unknown fleet is moving to intercept hegemony forces near Jupiter," Lieutenant Commander Steve Walsh reported. "They're not responding to communication attempts, but their formation suggests hostile intent toward the invaders." Kane opened a communication channel to Jake Morrison's civilian command network. For 3 days, she had been forced to coordinate with the cargo captain, whose warnings she had dismissed months earlier. His amateur fleet had accomplished more than her professional military forces. "Morrison, this is Admiral Kane," she transmitted. "Do you have any information about the new arrivals?" Jake's response came back immediately. "Admiral, I believe those ships belong to the Zelari. The energy signatures match data from the memory crystal. But these are not the simple trading vessels we've encountered before." As if responding to their conversation, the lead ship in the approaching fleet began broadcasting on standard communication frequencies. The transmission was in accented but clear standard language, and the voice was familiar to Jake's crew. "Captain Morrison, this is Kethvar speaking from the vessel Remembrance," the old Zelari said. "You showed kindness to strangers who had nothing to offer in return. Now it is time for us to repay that debt." Jake felt his heart racing as he realized the implications of what he was hearing. "Kethvar, how did you find us? And what kind of ship are you flying?" The holographic display on the Terra's Hope's bridge activated and showed the image of the elderly Zelari scholar. But instead of the cramped refugee vessel where they had first met, he was now standing on the bridge of an advanced warship that made human technology look primitive. "Captain Morrison, my people are not just traders and scholars as your species believes," Kethvar explained. "We are the survivors of the hegemony's first campaigns 3 centuries ago. We have spent all this time preparing for their return and gathering intelligence about their capabilities." Behind Kethvar, Jake could see other Zelari working at control stations that displayed tactical information about the ongoing battle. The ship's technology was clearly far in advance of anything humans or the hegemony possessed. "For generations we have searched for allies worthy of our trust," Kethvar continued. "We have observed dozens of species and found most of them wanting. They were either too aggressive like the hegemony or too weak to survive what was coming. But when you rescued my family from that broken ship, you showed us something different. The Zellari fleet moved through the solar system with precision that amazed human observers. Their ships were smaller than hegemony dreadnoughts, but they moved with incredible speed and agility. More importantly, they seemed to know exactly how to counter every tactic the invaders employed. "We have been watching your species for months," Kethvar explained as his ships engaged hegemony forces near Jupiter. "We needed to see if humans would unite against a common threat or fragment into competing factions. Your civilian defense network proved that humanity possesses the qualities we have been seeking." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. The Zellari ships used weapons that seemed to bend space itself, creating gravitational anomalies that crushed hegemony vessels from within. Their shields absorbed enemy fire and converted it into power for their own systems, but the most devastating weapon the Zellari possessed was knowledge. They had been studying hegemony tactics for 300 years, and they knew every weakness in their enemy's strategy. Jake watched in amazement as the elegant alien ships dismantled invasion formations that had conquered hundreds of worlds. "Captain Morrison, we need your civilian fleet to coordinate with our forces," Kethvar transmitted. "The hegemony will attempt to break through to Earth using their reserve forces. Your people know this system better than we do." Jake coordinated the combined human and Zellari fleet using communication networks that had been built on personal trust and mutual aid. Mining ship captains worked alongside alien commanders they had never met. Agricultural transport pilots followed tactical instructions from a species most humans barely knew existed. The final engagement took place in Earth's orbital space as hegemony reserve forces made a desperate attempt to reach humanity's homeworld. Admiral Kane's remaining military vessels fought beside converted cargo ships and mysterious alien warships in a battle that would determine the fate of human civilization. Colony Administrator Helen Price commanded a squadron of modified freight haulers that provided covering fire for Zellari ships as they moved to attack hegemony command vessels. Mining boss Carl Weber led his industrial rams in coordinated strikes that broke enemy formations and allowed the aliens to target their weak points. The hegemony found themselves facing opponents who understood their tactics better than they understood themselves. Every move they made was anticipated and countered by enemies who had spent centuries preparing for this moment. Their superior numbers became meaningless when facing coordinated resistance from two species working in perfect harmony. As the last hegemony ship retreated into hyperspace, Jake Morrison stood on his bridge and looked at the memory crystal that had started everything. The simple gift from a grateful refugee had become the foundation of humanity's greatest victory and the beginning of their first true alliance with another species. "Kethvar, why did you choose us?" Jake asked during the post-battle communication. "There must be other species you could have approached." The old Zellari smiled with an expression that somehow conveyed warmth despite his alien features. "Captain, we have learned that true strength comes not from advanced technology or superior numbers, but from the willingness to help others even when there is no benefit to yourself. When you rescued my family, you demonstrated the quality that makes a species worthy of survival." Admiral Kane joined the communication channel from her command station. Her earlier arrogance had been replaced by genuine respect for the civilian fleet that had saved Earth. "Jake, I owe you an apology. You tried to warn us and I didn't listen." "What matters is that we survived," Jake replied. "And now we have allies who can help us face whatever comes next." Kethvar's image flickered as his ship prepared to depart the solar system. "Captain Morrison, this victory is just the beginning. The hegemony will return with greater forces and we must be ready. But humanity has proven itself worthy of inclusion in our alliance. Together we will ensure that no more civilizations fall to their conquest." As the Zellari fleet disappeared into hyperspace, Jake reflected on the events that had brought them to this point. A simple act of kindness toward three stranded aliens had led to intelligence that saved his species and forged an alliance that would protect the galaxy for generations to come. The Terras. Hope turned toward Earth carrying news of victory and the promise of a new era in human history. Lisa Carter worked to repair battle damage while Ben Hughes plotted a course home through debris fields that marked humanity's greatest triumph. "Think they'll be back?" Lisa asked as she watched the last traces of the hegemony fleet disappear from their sensors. "Probably," Jake replied, looking at the memory crystal that continued to pulse with soft blue light. "But when they do return, they'll find something they didn't expect the first time." "What's that?" Captain Ben asked. Jake smiled as he thought about the alliance that had been born from a moment of compassion in the cold darkness of space. "They'll find that humans never forget our friends. And we never overlook a kindness." The battle for humanity's survival was over, but their journey as members of a galactic community was just beginning. The memory crystal would continue to pulse with ancient knowledge as humanity learned to take their place among the stars, guided by the simple principle that had saved them all. Sometimes the most important victories come not from superior firepower or advanced technology, but from the willingness to help a stranger in need.